jump in next. I'm Mark Price. My story is a little different, I think, from the gentleman to my left. I grew up looking up to and idolizing men like this, and then when it became my turn and my generation's term, we were obviously well embroiled, and I was in medical school during 9/11 and saw the towers come down, much like you did. And things like that, I think, strike a chord, obviously, with everyone in the room. I don't think that's a unique statement. And so for me, I'd always had these designs of going into the Navy. It was always the Navy. Maybe I saw Top Gun one too many times. I'm much more goose than Maverick, is part of the problem. And I decided, I think maybe I want to go to the Naval Academy. And my father, who knows me really well, said, you're kind of a screw up. You may not want to do that just yet. And so I thought that he was right and didn't do that at the time. Went to college, and much as you all were mentioning, certainly scholarships were an important part of me being able to go to school. And so I looked into an ROTC scholarship. And it became clear I'd have to get up early in the morning and have people yelling at me and things like that. So again, that didn't appeal to me, and I wound up getting other scholarships to go to college. And then I went to medical school after a little bit. And in medical school, again, the Navy would have been more than happy to pay your whole way there. You would owe the Navy time afterwards, and maybe you would get to do what you wanted to do, maybe you wouldn't, and they might, categorize you in a certain way. And that sounded a little too confining. So, at each step I had this choice, this option of being able to sign up, and each time I kept my hand in my pocket rather than raising it. And fast forward now, I'm a resident in orthopedic surgery. I'm at Mass General at the time, and I'm learning how to fix bones and tendons and all the other good stuff. And the desire is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. And I've been married to this wonderful woman all throughout these sort of abortive attempts. And I get to be now, I'm in my early 30s. We've just had our third child, so it seems like a perfect time to explore something like this. So we actually had a lunchtime seminar where a recruiter came in, and the only thing I could think of was, you remember the old Tom and Jerry cartoons where like the dog looks at the cat and it's like a ham hock that's just waiting to be devoured? I think that's what I looked like to the Navy recruiter. I was sitting there just waiting to be plucked, and so I was his easiest recruit of the day. So I very timidly took this worksheet home to my wife and said, hey, what do you think about this? And she offered some version, are you out of your mind? There's more to it than that. But she's an incredible woman, much as I'm sure Mrs. Stokes went through back in the day as well, and said, this is something I know you've wanted to do, and I know that it's something we can get through, and it's important to us and important to our family. So lo and behold, towards the end of my surgical residency, I raised my hand on the Constitution. It was a great day for something like that, a good Navy day, gray, overcast, a little bit drizzly, just exactly what you look for in the Navy. So I was going along, rather blithely, starting my practice. I had actually finished at MGH and went out to UMass out in Worcester and was working at the medical school out there. And I was one of the assistant doctors for the Red Sox, and so I was down at spring training, taking care of some of the guys down there, and I'd been playing phone tag with one of the officer in charge, OIC, of our unit, and I figured it was something I'd screwed up doing paperwork again, because I could never, ever get that right. And so we were playing phone tag and called me, and I finally got a hold of each other, and he said, well, BUMED, the Bureau of Medicine for the Navy, has identified you as an orthopedic surgeon. And I said, well, that's great that they've caught on. I've been an orthopedic surgeon for so many years. Go Navy. And he said, no, I don't think you understand. You've been identified, you're being deployed. And I said, well, where? And he said, Afghanistan. And then I still remember this conversation. I said, Afghanistan, Iowa? Is there an Afghanistan, Iowa? And I said, well, I sure as hell hope so. And he said, no, there is no Afghanistan, Iowa. That's not what you're going to. So I got home from spring training that night, probably about 11 o'clock, woke my wife up. She was nicely asleep, and I said, hey, I got a call from the Navy today. And you kind of know how that's going to go, right? They never call and say, we just wanted to let you know, good job. They're calling for the reason. And so she sat up in bed and said, what does this mean? And I said, I'm going to Afghanistan. How soon? I'm going in 6 months. And so, again, we had a good cry then, and sort of, can't really say it's a shock. I mean, the best way to stay out of going to a war is to not join the military, I think. So joining the military sort of precludes that. But, you know, we got the call, and again, being a testament to the strong woman she is, she said, this is something we can do. You know, we'll get through this. The kids at this point are in 4th grade, 2nd grade, kindergarten. So we've got, you know, young ones, but as you know, living in this area, it's a great community, good friends, things like that. So we were able to do it. So lo and behold, this was in 2012. By August, I was learning how to, you know, lace them up we were down in South Carolina, in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, Army territory. And they were the only ones who could teach the Navy people how to shoot proper. So next thing I knew, I was in Bagram Air Base, and then while there, I was the leader of what's called a forward surgical team. And so we had a 6-man team, and we were attached to special operations groups. So we would be either with the 5th Group Special Forces or the Delta operators. And when they would go to hit a certain place, we would set up a tent essentially to collect wounded and triage men and you know, basically help them on their way. And as part of this, there was also a humanitarian aspect to the mission. So we would go into villages where children had deformities or where people had limbs blown off from landmines or AK rounds or things like that, and take care of them and help do surgeries to correct those sorts of problems. And then finally, we were also mostly in the northern part of Afghanistan in an area called Kunduz, and we had that as our base of operations, and we would do sort of collect any problems that happened in that area. And that was starting to become a little bit hotter of an area once we left, and so there were political rallies with IEDs and, you know, 20 some odd people with amputations and things like that that you would see rolling in that you would need to deal with. So my experience with the war there was obviously, I think, very different. While on one hand, I think you see the depths of human depravity when you see people getting blown up and you know, hurt badly, and you know, take the limbs off a 22-year-old who asks how quickly they can get back to their, you know, shipmates. It makes it so that it would be easy to be a little bit soured by that. But instead, I would argue that my experience was very different, that you got to see the good. You know, you got to see the 22-year-old who couldn't wait to get back to his team. You got to see that 22-year-old actually made it out of there. You know, keep in mind the gentleman to my left, when they were dealing with wartime injuries, their best survival rates published were sometimes in the 60 or 70%. For us, if you came into our unit with a blood pressure and with a heartbeat, there was a 98% chance you were going to leave. So we took a lot of pride in the fact that while young men weren't necessarily returning home the same way they came over there, they were returning home, and we obviously felt that made the mission worthwhile. So we didn't have to deal with some of the same things, I think, of asking the questions of was it worth it and was our mission worth it, because we felt very, very secure in that knowledge. And then similarly, by helping out the other people, you know, the local townsfolk and things like that, we had several opportunities to really get to know the Afghans. And you know, they would thank you by pulling up the beat-up Toyota Tercel with a goat in the back. And you know, you'd have goat that night, and I'd make sure my whole team took heavy antibiotics so that we would forever. We would have naan and eat with them, and it became a very, very meaningful experience with that. And you learned, you know, a lot of what they were going through and some of the stuff that they had to deal with, obviously. So it made, you know, obviously, you know, what I tell my kids about this is I've had a very lucky career, and I've done a lot of great things professionally that I've been very happy about, but nothing that I'll do professionally will ever measure up to what I did over there. And so it was truly I would never say being in a war zone and seeing people in that situation was a good experience. It was a horrible experience, but it was a very meaningful experience. And so it's something that I will never, obviously, I'll always be proud that I did. But apropos of that, you know, we were asked to talk a little bit about what it was like to come home. And obviously coming home after being in that kind of situation where you're, you know, running around in the desert getting, you know, blown up, shot at, and things like that, it makes it a little bit different to come drive back down Route 9, you know, at Christmas time and argue about the traffic in Natick or something like that. So I know that I did have a little bit of a difficult transition, not anything horrible, and I don't think anything worse than any of my peers went through at the time, but you do have to ramp down on that. I mean, obviously going into Afghan villages, you don't know who's really on your side or not. And so we would always, you know, one of the things we had that was just sort of seemed natural was condition red. So our weapons were always round in the chamber, safety off, and you know, you were ready to go because you had no idea whether they wanted you there or didn't want you there. At least for me, I always felt better about it because we felt if we actually used it, we could fix them back afterwards. So if we broke it, we'd fix it. But otherwise, you know, some of that stress, it takes a little bit to come down from that. And then, but, you know, I think it goes back to what we talked about before, that it's a good community and a good network. And when you do all of that, it, you know, gets you back to normalcy to some degree. And so now I know that, you know, when I take a trauma call on a weekend and somebody's in a motorcycle accident and loses a leg, it's a lot easier to deal with because no one's going to shoot at me afterwards, and I'll be able to sleep in my own bed that night. So on that front, it's a win. But I guess that's my story in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer questions.